Good afternoon and welcome everybody into Two-Man Game here on ClaibsOnline.com. I'm Matthew Rocchio. That is Bob Ramsey. We're here to talk a little basketball. Specifically today, we're going to do a little NBA talk, as obviously the Christmas Day slate in the NBA is always kind of the big first benchmark of the season. Before we dive into some of that Christmas Day talk, though, we do have to talk about something that went on yesterday on Tuesday night, one of the most impressive games we've ever seen. But before we dive into all of that, Bob Ramsey, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
Happy New Year, everybody. Good to talk to you, Rocc.
Good to talk to you as well, Bob Ramsey. And again, we're going to talk a little about the NBA today. You guys want to stick with the two-man game, obviously, for all of your basketball talk, specifically just a little update. We're going to be coming to you on Friday afternoon. Bob will be on his way to New York for the Billikens facing off against St. Joe's in their conference opener in the A-10. So we're going to talk a little Billikens basketball on Friday afternoon for everybody out there. If you just want to mark your calendars, you can obviously catch us here on Spotify, live on Twitter, YouTube, all over the place, Facebook as well. But today we're going to be doing a little NBA talk. So I want to dive right into it. We're going to talk about the Christmas Day slate, like I said, but I do want to first talk about the game last night from Luka Doncic. 60 points, plus 20 rebounds, and 10 assists. Tied for the highest scoring triple-double in NBA history alongside James Harden. Though James Harden did not have 20 rebounds. That was absolutely sick. And I also want to point out, not only was it a one-of-one with Luka Doncic's game, but it was also one-of-one in that the Mavericks in that game against the New York Knicks were down 9 points with 35 seconds left. And teams coming into that situation were 0 and 3,000 plus. And then they tied the game up with a crazy sequence of some three-point plays. And then a sequence you always think about in basketball, but you only see once every about 3 or 4 seasons, which is you get a free throw, and then you miss it on purpose. And then the even smaller chance of this drawn-up sequence, you then get the putback immediately to tie the game up. I love that the Knicks made the right call in fouling up 3, by the way. I think that's one of the least talked about just smart plays in basketball. And then for it to actually successfully bite them in the ass almost was shocking. And then again, this was part of a 60-point, 20-rebound, 10-assist triple-double by Luka. It was just an amazing night of record-breaking first times in NBA history in Dallas last night.
Yeah, you talk about that situation, but it goes to show you, for those who do make the foul, you'll lose once in, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's absolutely playing the percentages.
Yeah.
And it just shows how hard it is to make that miss on purpose follow work for you. Having said that, that's why you've got to play everything out to the very end.
Absolutely. It was just a great play by the Mavericks, obviously, and it's just that's why one reason I kind of love basketball and why it's kind of heartbreaking at times is that the ball careens off perfectly. It comes out of Christian Wood's hands, who almost had a perfect offensive rebound. It then falls right into the hands of 2 different Knicks, who then fight each other for the ball, and then it pops right into Luka's hands. And if you go back and watch the highlight, I think my favorite part has to be that after Luka hits it, he literally jumps around like a 10-year-old who just got a piece of candy. Like he's jumping around like the biggest little kid in the world, and it just reinforces that you just don't expect, even though he's 6'7", you just never expect this kind of baby-faced Slovenian to just absolutely murder you night in and night out.
And it just goes to show you that most of these players at some level and in some situations still care about winning.
Absolutely they can. And you know what? We see that a lot from my current MVP candidate. We're going to switch over here to the Celtics. They've been on an absolute run, not just over the last season, but over the last few games. Big win on Christmas Day. Big win yesterday as well. Or I think it was Monday. Actually, I think they had it back-to-back. Overall, just the Celtics are cruising. And one of the reasons they are is because Jayson Tatum has gone from an all-star player to an MVP candidate. And a lot of people's opinion right now, he is number one in a very tight MVP race. And he only proved it more in the game against Milwaukee. I mean, he had a moment where he dunked on Giannis. He had a moment where, matched up on Giannis, he pulled up from 25 and hit an absolutely beautiful shot. Every time they put a switch on him on defensively, which was a mistake, he would just completely kill it. That was just unbelievably impressive game from the Celtics and Jayson Tatum. Again, he's my number one in the MVP race. On the other side, Milwaukee. I mean, it's Chris Middleton is such a gamer, and that game was a great proof of how their offense just stagnates when they don't have Middleton and when they have a team that knows how to pack the paint correctly and force Giannis into long jumpers. The Celtics great scheme right now for Giannis. That's a good thing, and they got the MVP right now. At this point, it's hard not to look at the Celtics as the favorite to be the East representative in the finals.
Yeah, Minnesota's struggling more than we thought they would. Miami's hurt. Cleveland is better, I think. Philadelphia is starting to get it together. Brooklyn's kind of scary right now, but all those teams, I think they have to show it over a little bit longer period of time to where you would say, okay, this is a team that can dethrone Boston. I know we're going to talk about Memphis later, but all these teams are okay. These are teams that could get better and could contend for that number one spot, but will they? Will they be able to answer those nagging questions?
Yeah, and by the way, the Bucks they have not played since Christmas. I was thinking about the Grizzlies, one of the teams that have played 2 games, including Christmas. The Bucks play tonight against the Bulls. They should absolutely rout them. In fact, Milwaukee, I think in that game right now, they're only favored. Milwaukee's -2.5. Bet that. Just a little side note while we're talking about a game that hasn't happened yet. If you want to, I can't believe the Milwaukee line's 2.5. I'm glad I caught that today. I'm going to go put money on that one. Yeah, for some reason, I don't even care. Without Chris Middleton, I don't care how bad their offense is. The Bulls are falling apart. The Bulls they're currently sitting on a roster that's mired by one of the worst trades in the last 5 or 6 years when they shipped off 3 first-round draft picks, including one they still haven't given up for Nikola Vucevic. Listen, I like Vucevic. He's a great player, but Franz Wagner is one of those draft picks. They traded away Wendell Carter, who was a lottery pick, who I loved, and I have no idea what the Chicago Bulls didn't see in Wendell Carter. To me, he was kind of just like a slightly less he was just a slightly less version of Jaren Jackson in the same draft. He was a guy who was going to block shots at 6'10", going to be a little bit of a small ball 5. He was going to be able to shoot threes, and he's doing that in Orlando. So, I mean, the just a little side note as I caught that, the Bulls are falling apart. Milwaukee should absolutely roll them. I don't care if they're without Brook Lopez, Drew Holiday. I mean, if Giannis is playing, they should win that game. But let's look at one of the other potential.
Before you move on, before you change topics, when you talk about a deal where you trade those picks,
God, it was bad.
The misjudgment is just not the trade itself, but the motivation for the trade, that the Bulls would misjudge that they were one player away from being a champion team. That's the only reason you do that. Okay, this guy wins us a championship. And even at the time, did anybody outside of the Bulls really think that was the case? And maybe they didn't either, but, this will get us a lot closer. Well, I don't think so.
It's funny that we're getting caught in this tangent, but I like it because I was so high on the Bulls last year. When DeMar DeRozan was at his most efficient and that defense was completely healthy, Alex Caruso was playing healthy, and Lonzo Ball was 100% healthy. And they could beat up small ball teams with a still useful Vucevic who wasn't a complete defensive liability. And you had 2 guys who could make up for that defensive liability. I liked the Bulls last year. But you saw as soon as the efficiency dipped and as soon as they lost one of those defensive anchors in Lonzo Ball that could make up for DeMar DeRozan and a Kobe White and a Nikola Vucevic not being a good defensive player, it completely fell apart. And so, it's not just the results that flawed. At their best, they were leaning on a high volume mid-range wing that can't guard the other team's best player to be their number one on a championship team, and that was never going to go very well. That has no offense, but I mean that's essentially you're taking. I mean, is DeMar DeRozan better than Carmelo Anthony? Because that's essentially kind of what the teams who had Carmelo Anthony as their best player were kind of rolling into every year, and it never worked.
Well,
And so it was a flawed process as well.
you're breaking it down piece by piece, and I'm just stepping back and saying, even when Rocc loved this team, did he think they could win in the NBA championship? And the answer is clearly no.
No, they were. I wasn't even that big on the Celtics without Robert Williams, and they were behind them. They were behind Boston. They're behind Philly. And then that's actually a good segue because that's the next team I want to talk about in the East, because if there is a team that could potentially challenge the Celtics other than the Bucks, maybe it's the 76ers. They're on an 8-game winning streak. They have another win on Christmas Day, and then they somehow lose a big lead and they completely waste a 46-point game by Joel Embiid against the Washington Wizards, who, on the complete flip side, were mired in a losing streak and look completely worse than they did a month ago. So it's crazy to me that the Sixers put together a run like this, and I'm ready to talk about Joel Embiid, maybe putting himself above a Nikola Jokic and a solid number 2 in the MVP race, and then they just completely waste one against the Washington Wizards at the same time when just a day after, Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting that James Harden is going to go back to Houston when his contract expires in Philadelphia, and all of a sudden a team that looks great on paper for the most part, but just has this volatility and this question mark in the playoffs because of Embiid and Harden. All of a sudden, I go from just thinking about straight basketball to getting mired in the non-basketball BS, and I can't help but be a little bit doubtful of the 76ers all of a sudden.
This is the owner's fault.
Yeah.
When you give control to the players, this is what you get.
And Harden had never had any problem exercising that power. I respect him for it, but he speaking of his exercising the power, to his point, he came out and said it was not true. At the same time, Adrian Wojnarowski, pretty good track record for saying things that are true when it comes to the NBA. So I'm not 100% doubtful of them. I don't think anybody's lying in this situation, but this is kind of how things get reported nowadays. This is kind of how players admit to stuff or don't admit to stuff nowadays. So I just think it's an odd situation to happen. Listen, the 76ers, I'm not freaking out over one game. The 76ers are still in ways flawed. Tobias Harris is overpaid, but he's a solid player. I think too many times we focus on a guy who's overpaid and just say, well, he's overpaid, that means he's bad. Well, no, a guy can be making 9 or 10 million more than he should be, but he can still be a useful asset. See a lot of shooters, and see different sports. See like Alexander Steen if you're a St. Louis Blues fan. These guys can be useful.
The problem with that narrative is it's not about the player; it's about the guy signing the check.
Yeah, exactly. And so is Harris, the guy you need to lean on? No, but if he's your third or fourth option, you're completely fine. The big question, though, is Harden locked in? Is he the same kind of player who can give you, 26, 8 and 8, night in and night out? And is Joel Embiid the number one player on a championship team? Everything that says every number you see from Embiid tells you it is, but yet they're not going to get there. They haven't got it done in the playoffs. But I think that's more on the fact that Morey ball at this point, Daryl Morey, and the way he builds his teams just hasn't proven to be effective throughout the playoffs. And that's because I think, as much as I have always been a proponent of pace and space and the 3-point revolution and things like that, if you look at the teams that have won championships, they all still have elite scorers that get their shot whenever they want to in the mid-range. And I think just sometimes you just have a volatile team. And when James Harden's your go-to scorer at times, I think your team still is very volatile. And I think, again, a game like the Wizards is a perfect example. Joel Embiid, great, fairly efficient. Yeah, he's not putting up Luka Doncic levels of efficiency, but still 46 points on 30 shots, or I think it might have been 32 shots from the field. That's not bad. But then James Harden's over here with 26 points on like 20 shots, and it just completely throws the counter off. And so I think maybe if he walked, and now we're talking about Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, in 2 years from now, a Tobias Harris contract off the books, I think it's understandable that it's thrown them off for this season because Harden has to be their second best player for them to win a championship this year. But him walking off to Houston, which I honestly think is kind of likely if they win the lottery and get Victor Wembanyama, because they're all of a sudden in the playoffs with those two players, I don't think it's that unlikely, and I don't think it's bad for Philadelphia in the long run. I think they're better off without James Harden, assuming, of course, you can draft or sign competently.
Yeah, you got to have good players. And if a problem leaves and you sign other players and build a team culture, that's the ongoing problem. That's what I was talking about before. When players have control, it's very difficult for the club to build a true team. And those who do, I think it's even more special today than it's ever been.
Yeah, and the thing is that we're going to talk about the Grizzlies here in a moment, and I love the wings. That if you took the wings, you took Niang, and you took Melton, who ironically was on the Grizzlies, and you put them on the Grizzlies, I'd be much happier about the Grizzlies than I am right now. So I even really like the wings and the defenders that Philadelphia is putting together. But they're going to have to show that they can be consistent night in and night out players. And I haven't seen that yet. So we're talking very heavy in the East right now. And I think it's clearly the Celtics are head and shoulders above everybody. And it's clear, I think, after we talked about today, there are question marks that we have to see from Milwaukee in the 76ers to get them back into the conversation right now in the East in any way, shape, or form. And the roster's there, the possibilities there, but we actually are going to have to see it.
Got to perform. Yep.
And let's move on to one of our pet products. We're always talking about the Memphis Grizzlies here. No problem there. I love watching Ja Morant. I love watching Jaren Jackson Jr. And they're close, and that's a lot of fun. So we're going to talk a little bit more Grizzlies because they're struggling now. Remember, we got to talk about the negatives. They talked a lot of crap about this kind of Warriors rivalry, and the Warriors were coming off two really rough games in the Eastern time zone. They got shellacked in New York, beat up in Brooklyn. They were without Stephen Curry. They were without Andrew Wiggins that night as well. And the Grizzlies get beat by about 20. It wasn't really close for the most of the second half. And again, no Curry, no Wiggins, a huge game from Ja Morant, but Jaren Jackson Jr. only plays 21 minutes because he picks up 5 fouls in fairly quick succession. That was a disappointing factor. Desmond Bane not having his shot, another very disappointing factor, a guy who's coming off an injury and doesn't look like he's there yet.
He hasn't been good.
He hasn't looked good yet at all. And again, as I just kind of said when I was closing out the 76ers commentary, the other backup wings, the other bench wings on the Grizzlies are not the group that a championship team has over the last 10, 15 years in the NBA. So the Grizzlies have some big things to look at. Obviously, Ja Morant has been special, but some of those little issues, and again, you talking a lot about Desmond Bane, those things have reared their ugly head a couple times now for the Grizzlies.
Yeah, it has, and I think it goes to show that it's pretty difficult to be successful without all of your weapons in the league today because there's enough talent all the way spread out. That's not a revelation. Everybody kind of gets that. You thought with Bane coming back that would just ignite the Grizzlies and they'd hit some of these tough games and really pound the opposition. But he's not shooting, foul trouble, and again, without watching every minute of some of these games, I do think we get into a too quick willingness of NBA teams to concede games and concede the moment. Yeah, we're down, so you're only going to play, 28 minutes instead of, why aren't you grinding? You're my only guy. You're playing 42 minutes tonight, and you say, oh, the answer is because I have to have you ready for the next night and the night after that and the night after that. And it goes back to my whole point about pro is just the opposite of college. Mm-hmm. In college, every game counts. In the NBA, it does not. And that can be a problem for the image of the league.
Yeah, and it hasn't necessarily gotten fixed. And listen, the Warriors got problems too. It was a home game, by the way. If the fact that they won didn't immediately tell you that it was a home game for the Warriors, right. They still can't win on the road. They're very good at home. They're going to get Curry back. I don't know if this game even tells me anything about the
No.
Warriors going forward. Again, it raises legitimate questions about the Grizzlies, I think, but it's crazy that I'll take something away from that game as the Grizzlies because it was so bad for them. But just I have no idea what the Warriors are going to look like, and them, the repeat conversation. It all comes down to, can Stephen Curry be an MVP caliber player? And I'm not saying he's ever going to be in the race this year, but can he be the Stephen Curry of old? That's going to be the big question with the Warriors. I think Draymond Green has kind of steadied off a little bit. Klay Thompson is never going to be Klay Thompson, but that was true last year as well, and they were able to get it done. Can the Warriors system continue to solidify the bench the way it was last year? That'll be interesting to see across the second half of the NBA season. And honestly, after last year, my perception of what the Warriors can do from the start of the season to the end and change is completely different, because they were a completely different team, at game 82 than they were at game 1 last year. So I'm not completely throwing them out, but if you can't win games on the road, technically, if you're a top seed, you can win a championship, but they're not going to be a top seed. So they're going to have to learn how to win some games on the road if they want to do actual damage come playoff time.
I'm not as pessimistic as you are, because I
Shocker.
see all the weapons.
Yeah,
and that the third and fourth and fifth options for them can all play and are getting more minutes and playing well. So I'm a little more optimistic than you are for the Warriors' near future.
that's fair. Let's go back a little bit to a team we touched on, the Washington Wizards. We obviously love talking about Jordan Goodwin's time there. I made a little bit of flub there. I think I said they were coming off a losing streak. Technically, they had won a game before that win against them. They had lost 8 of their last 9. So technically, it wasn't a losing streak, but it had been a fairly rough run for the Washington Wizards after a more positive start. One of the unfortunate parts, and in fact, in one of their last win, their 8th out of those 9 games, they lost 120 to 113 to the Utah Jazz, and that was a 15-minute performance from Jordan Goodwin. He had 11 points. Unfortunately, that was 3 games ago, and that's the last time we've really seen a lot of Jordan Goodwin coming off the bench for the Wizards. He played 8-9 minutes the next game against the Suns, and he has been a DNP coach's decision in these last 2 wins for the Wizards. Unfortunately, not the way you want to see a trend for a guy who seemed like he was getting more minutes and getting a bigger part in his first NBA season.
I just don't understand it. The coach knows what the coach is. Unseld knows what he's doing. He's got a reason. I just don't know what it is for a guy that worked his way into the starting lineup because of injury. Mm-hmm. But as an outsider looking in, it appeared Jay Good was playing well. So, and so that's, I'm just curious as to why.
I think the only thing I can
coming off the bench, playing in front of him, that it's not very good.
The one thing I would say is that he being the head coach Wes Unseld Jr., he's shortened up the lineups in all the games where there's been DNPs. It just hasn't been Jordan Goodwin being the 12th guy on the bench, not getting a DNP. He's shortened his rotation from a full 12 to about 10 guys. Or 9 guys in some of these games. So there's been 3 or 4 guys. Will Barton's, a 10-year NBA vet who, scored, he's got like a career average of like 9-10 points across, a few hundred NBA games. And he got the last 2 DNPs as well. So I think it's more of a shortening his rotation to maybe kind of control the game a little bit better if you're Wes Unseld Jr. If this was kind of a more like a 12th man on the bench or you're still feeding the bench, but Jordan's getting 1 or 2 minutes, I'd be a little bit more like, what's going on here? But I think this might just be a general kind of change things up move from Unseld Jr., and maybe we get it back on track in a game or 2. I'll tell you this right now, I'm going to be watching the box scores to make sure.
Like I said, I don't know the answer. I know there is one. I just don't know what it is. I'd figure it. There aren't 4 guys on the bench better than him based on performance. Now, I don't know what goes on in practice. I don't know about relationships. I'm not sure what role they're trying to have guys fill because we're not there. But it just seemed very odd to me.
I do want to say Goodwin has been a great example of something I maintain, because one of the complaints of the NBA is the lack of defense, and I always maintain that guys like Jordan Goodwin will always have a better chance at his path than guys who are just playing scorers, because you can get on an NBA court because you can hit threes. But if you can guard 4 positions, you stay on an NBA court. Jordan Goodwin, if he was having those games where he was going 6 of 6 from the field, it'd be getting him minutes. But I guarantee you he wouldn't be having those 15, 18, 19-minute games if it wasn't because he could guard 2 through 4. And that's, I think, something that people lose sight of because the NBA is such an offensive game. And now, I was reading an article today about how offensive ratings have just skyrocketed over the last few seasons in the NBA. And now it used to be a good team had 104, and now bad teams have 110, and so it's just completely changed in that area. So I think his defense is going to keep him going, but I just think we're seeing a little bit of change here on the Wizards.
Yeah, and with Beal hurt again, or maybe being hurt, will he get back in the lineup? I'd hope to see him play together. And Beal and Goodwin, 2 St. Louis guys. I don't know if it doesn't look like that's in the cards for the near future.
We'll see. We'll keep watching the Wizards. We'll keep us up to date on all these stories that we've been talking about. Again, a huge game from Luka Doncic. Talk a little Jayson Tatum, Joel Embiid, and what the Memphis Grizzlies are going to do. You can go back and listen to the podcast if you're just catching it now as we're closing out live back on Spotify. That link will be up in a little bit. Also, you can watch the live feed on Twitter, YouTube, and ClaibsOnline.com. Rammer, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Two Man Game, where we talk a little NBA. We're going to be talking some SLU on Friday afternoon. Before we go, Rammer, tell everybody a little bit about Royal Banks of Missouri.
Royal Banks of Missouri, 60 years giving you the best service in the business. They're going to help you find the right product to help you with your personal finances and your professional business finances. Royal Banks, where better service means better banking.
Thank you so much, Rammer. Thank you so much, St. Louis. Have a great rest of your day.
As one of St. Louis's largest veteran-owned companies, St. Louis Acura knows what it means to serve. As we head into the holiday season, St. Louis Acura is collecting Toys for Tots for the United States Marine Corps and a clothing drive for local military charities and churches. Each donation can earn a gift from our boutique or a discount on a vehicle service or car wash. Please help us help others this holiday season, and thank you for helping St. Louis Acura become one of the area's top 50 fastest growing businesses for 2021.